Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. It's great to have you all here today. It's the 5th of February, 2023, and welcome to our session. Let's jump over to our agenda and we'll take a look at what we're going to cover today. First up, Adobe Podcast Enhance. Now, Adobe Podcast is, we'll go into more detail about what that is, but the Enhance is one part of Adobe Podcast. It's a larger project that Adobe's working on. And so we'll cover that in just a few minutes here. We're also going to take a look at some of the plugins that come with with Blackmagic Design's Fairlight, which is part of the DaVinci Resolve post-production application. And specifically, these are basically the plugins, everything that you can use to process your audio within Fairlight. And then after that, we will jump over to the chat to take a look at what questions people have there and see if we can address some of those. So first up, let's go over to our Mac here and let's take a look at Adobe Podcast. So if you haven't seen this before, it's over at podcast.adobe.com. It is, how they pitch it is an AI-powered audio recording and editing all on the web, an audio tool for people with stories to tell. So I think the idea here is to make the process of recording an audio-only podcast very, very simple. And so the tools that are included in that include, first of all, I don't know what the status of all of these are, but the first one is something that will actually take your spoken word recorded audio and convert it into text, and then you can edit the text. This is very much like a service called Descript, if you've not heard of that before. So very similar thing there that Adobe's working on as well. They also already have, in Premiere, they have this speech-to-text technology. It actually works quite well. We've actually used it at work a little bit. Not perfect, but pretty decent. It'll also have a remote recording component to it, so something like Riverside.fm or lots of others out there. And then this is the one that we're going to look at today. This is what they're calling Enhance. They are calling it AI-powered audio. Enhanced speech increases clarity by removing background noise and sharpening your voice's frequencies, which is a weird way to say that, but it makes it sound as if everything was recorded in a professional studio. I think that's a better description. That's what they're aiming for, and we'll get some samples for you. Also has this mic check just to help people optimize the position of their microphone and optimize the gain level as well, and help to try and reduce some background noise. So the better off you are in terms of managing this stuff when you record, the easier it's going to be for post-processing, whether you do it through this tool here or any other tool. And then it looks like they also have some project templates. So that's the overall idea. Again, today we're going to take a look specifically at the module called Enhance. And this is what the UI looks like. It's very simple. You literally drag an audio file, either a WAV or an MP3. I wouldn't recommend MP3 if you can avoid it, but it will take MP3s and WAVs. It will not take AAC encoded audio. That's the format you often see nowadays. Don't know why they chose MP3 instead of AAC, but whatever. I don't for whatever reason, that's what they chose. And then it processes it up on their servers, and then when it's done, you can download it. Now, rather than have you sit here and wait for me to do that, it does take a little bit of time, but let's go ahead and switch on over to, I've got RX open here, and we can actually listen to a variety of samples. So here's a sample that I recorded up in our dining room. It's pretty reverberant space with wood floors, and there's a dishwasher running in the background. This is what it sounds like at the start. All right, well, we're recording in a fairly reverberant space onto a MacBook. We've got dishwasher running behind it, and this is what you can reasonably expect. So, a couple of things, and here's after. All right, well, we're recording in a fairly reverberant space onto a MacBook. We've got dishwasher running behind it, and this is what you can reasonably expect. So, a couple of things, we're recording, again, the original. All right, well, we're recording in a fairly reverberant space onto a MacBook. We've got dishwasher running behind it, and this is what you can reasonably expect. So, after. All right, well, we're recording in a fairly reverberant space onto a MacBook. We've got dishwasher running behind it, and this is what you can reasonably expect. So, okay, couple of notes. Just looking at the spectrogram, so here's the after. It looks like it's doing some pretty substantial gating here compared to the original. See all this kind of blue trace here is noise, broadband noise, room tone, and here they've cut it pretty substantially. I did notice here at the end of this phrase, listen to this carefully. This is the processed version.
Running behind this. And
play that again.
Washer running behind this.
Notice how it sort of clips it off better generally, but it is still going to require, I think, a pretty decent starting place. It also, notice here, it also changed the loudness here. So here is the original recording. It sat at minus 26 LUFS, and this boosted it just a tiny bit to minus 24.7. Kept the true peak pretty similar. Yeah, in fact, you got a little bit more. It did do a little bit of compression there, it sounded like, as well. So there's our first sample. Let's take another sample here.
There was a quick question.
Oh, quick question. Let's go ahead and look at the question. Matt, were you using a mic or the built-in Mac? That was the built-in mic on the Mac. Yeah, that's it. Literally just the MacBook was all I used. No external microphones whatsoever. So for that, pretty impressive result, I would say. Not perfect, but pretty impressive. Okay, here's our next sample.
So recently I've been learning how to use Procreate for iPad with an Apple Pencil, of course. And that is actually a really cool and pretty powerful program. It's like everything that...
Okay, and after.
So recently I've been learning how to use Procreate for iPad with an Apple Pencil, of course. And that is actually a really cool and pretty powerful program. It's like everything that young me as an artist wished that she had access to. So
okay, it's still similar type thing here, just in terms of notes here. Here's the after. Looks like it's doing some pretty substantial gating between phrases there. And here's the before. So you can see there's definitely more noise in between phrases there. Also, what's interesting is that it seems to it's almost like it adds low frequency stuff down here, which is a little bit interesting to me. I don't know what that is or why that is. I noticed that in my samples here. Here's the processed sample of me in the dining room. Look at all that low frequency stuff down there versus the original. There was some, but less. I would have expected it to roll that off with a high pass filter, but it looks like it's almost like it adds it to Emma's sample, which is kind of weird. Not sure why. All right, let's do one more sample here. This one's going to be tougher. And what we have here is we have Danny talking, reading one of our Sherlock Holmes quotes, but we also have footsteps and even a phone chime in the background. So let's see how this does.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old
and after.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an...
Okay. It actually, it did a pretty good job there. I don't have other tools that could do substantially better than that, but you could still hear the footsteps, although, especially during the, while Danny was talking there, it did attenuate them quite nicely in between phrases, and that little ringtone here definitely attenuated that. The one that wasn't covering speech, the one that occurred during speech, I could still hear that back here. But again, you can see it noted. I don't know why it's adding this low frequency stuff here. There was a lot less of it here. In any case, that's an example of Adobe Podcast. So let's go back to the chat here and see if anyone has any questions or thoughts on that. What are your thoughts on that? From what I can tell right now, Renee says MacBooks don't have so bad mics after all. They're actually, it was not too bad. That was a 13-inch MacBook. Did okay. Premiere Beta already lets you rough cut by deleting the transcribed text. Yes. Very good. Thank you, Flo. The processed audio sounded like you were speaking with a lisp, so maybe got a little too aggressive on the de-esser. That's possible, yeah. Seemed to have worked better on Emma's voice.
Than my voice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit, it's going to differ from recording to recording. It does seem to have a bit of a lisp effect. Yeah, maybe a little too heavy on the de-essing. Okay, cool. Thanks for the insights there. I don't know exactly what it's doing. Aside from, it does seem like it's doing some gating, or sort of a noise, the noise gate, noise expander. So that's the most obvious thing that it's doing, but it's probably, actually, if we go back to the Mac here again, this one's interesting. There's also this trace here. One of our lights actually makes a 17 kilohertz noise of some sort. It's a hum, or it's weird. It didn't totally remove it, but it did attenuate it along with everything else, it looks like. So in any case, I don't think, it's not a horrible tool for those that are doing, podcasts and don't know a lot about audio processing, but let's go ahead and could we hear the before and after one more time for one example? Okay, sure. Let's go back to the first one and get that queued up. Okay, here's the before. All right, well, we're recording in a fairly reverberant space onto a MacBook. We've got dishwasher running behind it, and this is what you can reasonably expect. So, after. All right, well, we're recording in a fairly reverberant space onto a MacBook. We've got dishwasher running behind it, and this is what you can reasonably expect. So, okay, there is one more sample, Shoji. Yeah. Here's my thought. Let me go ahead and share my thoughts. Let's go back to the main camera here for a bit. I see it as a tool. I see it as something that if somebody has a podcast idea that they want to get up and running with, and they don't have a lot of, don't have any experience processing audio, I think this is probably going to be better than what they could probably achieve with maybe an hour of education. So it's probably going to be better than what they could otherwise do. What I haven't tested yet is a 2-person recording to see what it does in terms of managing that part of a mix. I think that's a more sophisticated thing. That would be interesting to see how that goes. But that's our first look at it there. And again, mainly from what I can see, it's mostly gating out the in-between phrases, but also doing some frequency gating, which is how the more sophisticated denoisers generally work, is they usually have, Isotope RX, I believe, has 256 different gates across the different audios, different portions of the audio spectrum, and gates each of them separately at different times so that it can manage any noise that's occurring. Where there's not a lot of dialogue, it can actually pull that back. So it's going to assume that that's noise and pull that back, which is interesting. So in any case, when they call it AI powered, I have to confess that I think a lot of marketing organizations or marketing groups are using the term AI, and they're throwing it around because everyone else is throwing it around. I think it's probably more machine learning, if I had to guess. So, if you want to get technical about it, I don't think it's probably actually AI. But in any case, there's an example of how you can use that as a tool. Now, if you go to podcast.adobe.com, there is a button. Let's see. You can request access. I have an Adobe account, so I subscribe for Audition. That's the only actually app I have on subscription from Adobe. I don't know if I was given access because I have that account, or if anyone can request access. In any case, that's where you'll find that right there. Okay, let's go and move on to our next topic here, and this is DaVinci Resolve's Fairlight. First of all, before we jump into the Fairlight FX, let me just clarify one thing. There are 2 different versions of DaVinci Resolve. There is the free version and there's the studio version. The studio version is $295 US, as probably many of you know. And in terms of just the Fairlight portion of Resolve, there are very few differences. The main difference, and I wish Blackmagic was a little clearer about the differences on their side. I had to go diving, and I'm not sure I have all the differences. But in essence, I think the difference is that you get the voice isolation plugin comes with the studio version, but not the free version, if I understand right. And then secondly, you get Dolby Atmos mixing capability in the paid studio version, but not in the free version. That's my understanding of the differences. So other than that, pretty much the same thing. So just wanted to preface with that before we jump in and start taking a look at some of these effects. Now, we don't have time to look at all of the effects today. Actually, we're just going to look at a few of them, probably what I would consider the most useful ones for processing dialogue audio. So let's go ahead and jump in and take a look here. I've got a project set up, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off my index there. Over here on the left-hand side, I have all the Fairlight effects, and you can just access that by clicking on the Effects button right up here at the top left. I've got a few different tracks set up so that we can demo some of these. And you can, by the way, you can drop these individual plugins either on a clip. In this case, I would drop it there, or you can actually drop it into the track over here as well. Or you can actually drop it here to put it in the track as well, the track header. So if I drop it there, you can see it added it to track A2 sibilants. Now we actually only need one version of that, so I'm going to get rid of that just to illustrate how you add the effects. All right, let's start with the de-esser. So I have this sample here with some sibilants where I'm saying she sells seashells. Let's go ahead and highlight just a section of that right here. And I'm going to unmute this particular track here. And let's go ahead and pull up our de-esser. Now you'll notice when you hover over the effects here in the track, you get three options. There's a little red dot. That means that's how you turn it on or off. There is the controls button here. That's how I actually bring up all the controls for that particular plugin. And there is also this little drop down here if you want to delete the plugin or change it to something else, you can do that here, or even just disable it if you wanted to. And you also need to make sure that the effects in is turned on, so it's actually using the plugins. All right, with that, let's go ahead and play through. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put this on loop play, continue playing it back. Remember, I have all the other tracks muted. I'm just playing this one sample here. And I'm going to go ahead and adjust some of the settings here, and let's see what kind of results we can get. And here we go. I'm going to do Option / to loop playback. She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. She sells seashells by the seashore. Okay, so there's a little sample. That's a decent de-esser. You gotta use a light hand there. I think really, again, the idea here is take the edge off. If you push it too hard, you start getting that lispy sound. And what you can do also to find the particular frequency where the sibilance lies is you can crank it to 100% and then sweep the frequency back and forth until you find where it's doing the most reduction and where it starts to sound very lispy. So we can do that again here. Again, Option / to loop playback. She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the... There it is. Then you definitely need to back off. I felt like on the fast, it A kind of medium was probably the sweet spot on my particular voice, but again, just use your ears, check the different ones. And here, for example, if I'm doing any sort of reduction, I usually, just to take the edge off, I'm looking for somewhere, let's see where it's doing it.
She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. She sells seashells by the seashore.
Usually, yeah, somewhere between, 2 and maybe 5 dB of attenuation is generally what I'm looking for, again, just to take the edge off and retain the articulation, but make it so it's not so grating to hear. So there's the de-esser. De-esser worked pretty decently, I thought. So good on that one. Let's work our way down the list here. The de-hummer, interestingly, I didn't find the de-hummer worked very well, sadly. I actually found that the noise reduction worked better with a hum than that did. In fact, let's give you a sample here. Where was our hum? There it is right there. We'll go ahead and drop this on a new track, create a new track for us. And just make sure that we have that over to the left. Let's just highlight that first portion there. And we'll call this hum just so that we have some good clarity there. Up here, let's go and drag our hummer or de-hummer and drop it on the hum track sample. And let's option forward slash.
It was easier to know it than to... It was easier to know it than to... It was easier to know it than to...
Okay. For this particular hum, that's not doing anything for us, basically. So let's go ahead and pull out our mixer here. That's the freezer, yeah. So let's disable that one. Let me add the noise reduction instead to that track. And we have a couple modes. We have the auto speech mode and we have manual where you can actually learn the noise profile. So let's try it in auto first.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were...
Do the loop playback option forward slash.
It was easier to know it than to... It was easier to know it than to...
Okay, let's do let's actually learn. Let me just choose, come back down here, select just the hum, and I'm going to put it in manual mode and learn and loop playback. Okay, now that we've learned that profile, let's go ahead and see what it does by playing it back. It's okay.
It was easier to know it than to...
It helps. Without? With. Auto mode. About the same. If we expand that so that we can hear all of it.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite...
So there's an example of, I'm not sure on what the de-hummer is doing, but didn't seem to be doing a lot for us, but that's one example there of the noise, the denoise as well, or the noise reduction is what they call it here. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and take a look back up here. Dialogue processor is kind of an interesting one. This one actually is really nice because it gives you a whole chain of different things to work with. In fact, let me just show you. I'm going to unmute this track here. This is just a track of me talking into the boom mic, and that's on A1. So A1, pop open the dialogue processor here. And actually, let me select the range so that we just listen to the part that we want to. Okay, there we go. Let me go ahead and turn all of this off, and I'm going to turn them on one by one and apply them. We have a derumbler, which is essentially a high-pass filter. We have a depopper, which is for plosives, a de-esser, which is for removing the edge off of sibilants, the sizzling sound you get when they say letter S or C, a compressor for helping us I think a compressor, what a compressor does, a lot of times we think of it in terms of making the audio louder in the end, once everything gets processed through the compressor, but there's more to it than that. It actually changes the sounds to some extent. We have an expander, which is for reducing noise between phrases, and an exciter. And this will be interesting. I'm going to switch it to male voice. So I'm going to go ahead and run through, and let's see what we get here. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth. All right. Okay. The Excite isn't doing much for me, I don't think, not in a positive way. But there is what we had. We didn't have a lot of plosives in that piece, so the depop didn't really serve us here, so I didn't even turn that on. But the derumble was basically a high-pass filter, rolling it down to about 70. Did a nice job of removing that low frequency, any low frequency stuff that was down there. Again, you may or may not notice that depending on what you're listening on. But that just gives you more headroom overall. The de-esser was very similar to what we just looked at. The compressor is a very simple two-knob compressor, basically the threshold and amount. Threshold is the point at which it starts to kick in, and we had that set to about minus 24.5. And then the amount. So you don't get a lot. Oh, and then you have a fast or slow, and you can choose which of those you want to use. The expander, again, basically like a noise gate. It was okay. It was tripping a little bit on some of the, like at the breaths. We could probably tune that threshold a little bit more, and then the exciter just thinned my voice out. I didn't really care for that a whole lot. But if you have someone that has a voice that's extraordinarily dark without a lot of high frequency energy, this could be really helpful in balancing that out. So there's an example of the dialogue processor. Okay, why don't we take a pause there and see what questions we've got so far out in the chat. Diesel, I bought the studio version after finding out it's a one-time payment. I look forward to learning how to use the video editor and Fairlight. Very good. Yeah, the nice thing is it is a one-time licensing fee, and it comes with, if you buy one of the Blackmagic cameras, it comes with a license as well. That's where I got my license, in fact. So, coming from Logic, I recently tried the Fairlight free version plugins and was very impressed. It's a great bundle. It is surprisingly decent. I think especially the dynamics controls, the EQs are decent. Should be. Fairlight is a company that existed before Blackmagic, by the way. So Blackmagic Design bought Fairlight. Fairlight has been making big consoles for TV and film for many, many decades. And so I think they had a lot of that worked out already. But thanks for the note there, Tom. The most impressive feature to me is the reverb, which lets you place a voice in a 3D room to make it match the position of the person in a video. Yep, we'll take a look at that in just a minute here. Blackmagic acquired Fairlight, which was once a pioneer digital workstation that was the first wave of digital audio workstations used for film production. Audio post companies were based on it. Yep. George Lucas had a project called Sound Droid also with a matching nonlinear picture editor called Edit Droid. Nobody outside LA ever saw the Star Wars stuff, but there were Fairlights in Dallas. Very good. Thanks for the history there. The dehummer is for constant hum from power lines, I think. Yes, I think you're right. Yeah, but that hum, which was from a compressor in a freezer, I've used other dehummers on it, and it's a fairly complex hum. I will grant that. That was a complex hum, but other dehummers had done a much better job than that one did, so I don't know. Different samples might do better with it. I'm not saying give up on it. I'm just saying it wasn't a home run with our particular sample. Mark, would you consider hardware tools like the DBX processors obsolete since digital processors like Fairlight and Isotope are so prevalent today? No, I think they still have their place for live sound, where I think they still have their place. I have a DBX here today. We're running through this Shelford channel with a compressor and an EQ. So I think there's still some value there. But I think, yeah, I mean, obviously digital is here. It's here to stay. It's not going away. But I do think there's a place for the analog too. All right, let's head on back and see what else we've got here. Jumping ahead, we do have a frequency analyzer. So all this is literally, as I play back, is it's going to, sorry for my squeaky chair here. It's getting squeakier. I don't know if you've noticed. Let's play back, and this is just going to be, all right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how, just a real-time analyzer. So you do have that available, which is great. Low frequency effects. Oh, a limiter, very useful. I'm going to drop that here on this one right here. Let's disable some of these others, the frequency and even the dialogue, and pull up the limiter. Going to do Option / to loop play. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how, there you go. If you need to boost your levels, the limiter will do a nice job for you. Yeah, that's the limiter. That one works pretty nicely as well, in my experience. We also have an overall meter for whatever reason, if you wanted to do that for just an individual track, although you've got everything up here. But you've got another meter you can drop in there as well. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope. You can make it a little bigger, so if you need something a little bigger, that's an option as well. We're going to go ahead and actually just get that one out of the chain there. I'm going to come back to some of these others. You also have a multi-band compressor. Drop that on the track. For those not familiar with a multi-band compressor, it's essentially the same as a compressor, except that you can compress different frequencies to different amounts. And let me just demonstrate here how I might do that on my particular voice. So playback. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works. Here's an example of, instead of using EQ, you can actually use a multiband compressor to sculpt the character of a voice. And what I'm doing here, for example, I just boosted up the gain, the makeup gain on band 2, which is from 90 to 370 hertz. And that actually can give it more of a broadcasty sound. You have to be careful. It can start to sound really woolly and woofy at some point. But if you needed a little bit more low end, that's one thing you can do. And also if you needed more articulation, this band right now, which again, you can actually adjust these here. If I wanted to go maybe somewhere around 2500 hertz, if I was not getting a lot of articulation in a voice, I could use that. I could do some additional makeup gain on that particular band to get a little bit more articulation. So here's an example. Works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth. Okay, obviously not a great fit for my voice. I have plenty of that energy in my voice, but for those with darker voices that don't have a lot going on there. Or if you can actually go negative as well. Well, let's... All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away. So some examples of the different things you can do there. You can also use maybe the fourth band if you wanted to. If you're getting a lot of sibilance, you can actually drop that threshold way down. Let's experiment with that. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away. Not recommended, by the way. This is not a great way to do de-essing, but there, just to illustrate that there are lots of different ways you can approach this. So a multiband compressor can do some interesting things for sculpting the character of a voice. And in fact, I think, for example, one of the things I remember seeing the trailer when years ago now, and you actually see this in some films and TV shows as well. I've noticed, what was it? It was the Han Solo. It was the Force Awakens trailer. Han Solo found the Millennium Falcon and is on it, and he goes, "Chewie, we're home," with all this vocal fry and really, obviously, really processed voice. It's supposed to sound like it has a ton of gravity, and indeed it does. I mean, it was a brilliant job that they did there, but I think they're probably doing things like this to get that very distinct sound. I was watching another show called Endeavor. It's on, it's a PBS show, and I think it's a BBC, I can't remember, but it's a detective show basically based in the UK. And I saw there was a scene where all of the shots were wide, and there were 3 different investigators in this relatively large room, and the perspective looked fairly far away, but you had these beautiful, rich voices at the same time, which I think that's an artistic choice, and you can definitely do that, but they're probably doing some sort of processing like this to get that because, or maybe it had to do with the placement of the lavalier microphones they were using as well. I doubt that they were using boom. I mean, maybe, but those were awfully wide shots for a boom mic. So in any case, there's another tool there. We already looked at the noise reduction. I'm not going to come to that. Yes, Danny has one other thing in the chat here. Why and when to use the dialogue leveler versus the compressor limiter? Seems the leveler is the easy button. Oh, let's do that. Let's take a look at it. And let's see what we get here. So I'm going to turn off the multiband compressor. And here is the dialogue leveler. That was interesting. Why am I getting that? Let's see here. Let's go ahead and get rid of all of these. I don't think I've... Should be good. We're not doing any bus sends, so... That's interesting. Okay, well, let's try to put it on a different track here then. Pull up my media pool. Actually, I'm going to go into a different sample here. So I'm going to go into my project manager. I'm going to pull up my multicam interview. I'm going to And I actually have the dialogue leveler turned on over here. This is the sample we used in the course that we just released on Fairlight. Let me just show you. Here we have the dialogue leveler. And you have, first of all, you have a drop down that allows you to choose kind of the character, if you will. You can allow wider dynamics. In other words, it won't do a whole lot of, it won't level too aggressively. You can optimize for more sources, which sounds like kind of an average. You can have it produce more lift for the low levels, so when there's lower stuff going on. And then it says lift soft whispery sources. So let's go with the optimized for most sources. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and I need to come into my index here and mute everything. Let's go ahead and mute the other tracks there. And the bounced mix. Okay, so we're just going to get my boom microphone. And let me go ahead and play through, and I'll start with it off, and then we will turn it on. Oh, you can also reduce loud dialogue, so that's, kind of telling it to optimize for that. I'm going to tell it not to lift soft dialogue. Here, it's not that the dialogue is particularly soft. It would be lifting the kind of some of the background noise as well, and then there's also this background reduction option here. So you just have to kind of use your ears and listen to what it's doing. Here we go. Starting with it off. I think appreciating someone's work like Frank Lloyd Wright, you would have to start to kind of absorb the principles of design, right? I mean,
Yes.
some of the basic principles of design.
Yes.
Got it. Cool. Okay. First, for film, was watching Star Wars with my dad when I was a kid. Obviously, I'd seen movies before that, but that was the first one that really made a dramatic impression on me. Of course, you have kind of the hero's journey in a modern film, at the time that was a modern film.
Yes.
That was also entertaining, a little bit cheesy to be. It's pretty transparent there. Let's go ahead and turn on the lift soft dialogue. To be honest, but also pushed a lot of boundaries from a technical standpoint that were just really. Oh, I'm doing the wrong one. No wonder it wasn't sounding that much. Here's the one I should be using. Start back here. I think appreciating someone's work like Frank Lloyd Wright, you would have to start to kind of absorb the principles of design, right? I mean, some of the basic principles of design.
Yes.
Got it. Cool. Okay. First, for film, was watching Star Wars with my dad when I was a kid. Obviously, I'd seen movies before that, but that was the first one that really made a dramatic impression on me. Of course, you have kind of the hero's journey in a modern film, at the time that was a modern film.
Yes.
That was also entertaining, a little bit cheesy, to be honest, but also pushed a lot of boundaries from a technical standpoint that were just really, at that time in the world, it was like, wow. Okay, it does an okay job. It's fairly transparent. That's another way to do it. This is not going to allow you to sculpt the sound quite so much, and I feel like there's some work that would need to be done as far as breaths here as well. They were really becoming really prominent. So there are a million different tools. You can approach it in a lot of different ways. So let's go back to our other project here. Any questions in the chat there, Danny, that we need to be looking at?
Yes.
Okay, let's take a pause and take a look at those. If you own a Sound Devices Mix Pre, would you still consider their Noise Assist plugin, considering that Fairlight comes with so many features, or is the Noise Assist more effective? It depends on what you're doing. For podcasting, I think, and if you're close miking, you have the microphone really close, generally not booming, I find Noise Assist to be pretty effective for steady state noises or continuous noises like fans or maybe air conditioning or something like that. I do think there's value there, especially if you have a quick turnaround. I would apply it to one of the mixed channels and not to one of the isolated channels. I believe you only get one instance anyway. So I'd apply it to the mix so that you still have the isolated channels that are unprocessed in case anything goes wrong with it. So yeah, I think there's still value there. I especially think there's value if you have a multi-person podcast, you're using a mix pre. The Mix Assist is, I think, a fantastic way to save time in post-production. You will, if you've got to turn it around quickly or you don't have a lot of time, that is a great way to reduce the amount of processing to get a very quality result. So Mix Assist, I actually think, is more valuable for the types of things I do typically versus Noise Assist, although Noise Assist can be helpful as well. Okay, next up from Shoji. In your audio example, you mentioned the DPA 4017B. How do you like this boom mic for recording dialogue? It's my favorite shotgun microphone by far. It's also my most expensive one. I think it's the most neutral sounding. It's a great mic. Really like it. Tiny. It's small as well, much smaller than traditional medium shotgun microphones. And you can choose different preamps as well. Next from Grand Studio, should I normalize the audio before tuning it with these plugins? Which should be done first or last? If it's really quiet, then yeah, I would boom it, normalize it. So let's go ahead and Danny, if you can switch back over to the Mac here. I'm going to come over to this clip here. Let's just go up and I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose Analyze Audio Levels. This is at -30. I might just bump that to -26 or something, just as a starting point. And then do my mix, use my ears to determine how loud this track should be relative to all the other tracks in my mix. And then at the end, I'll bounce the mix out, and then I'll do my overall loudness normalization. So the answer is yes and yes. If you need it, just use it when you need it. And if you don't, like if you come in, this clip right here, for example, if I right-click on this and choose Analyze Audio Levels, this one is sitting at -24.8. I don't need to normalize that. That's in a good spot right now. So I wouldn't do that beforehand. I'd go do my processing, mix it, use the fader to get it to the right level so that it sits within the mix correctly. It sounds like it's right, how I want it to sound. And then once I bounce my entire mix, then we can do our loudness normalization after that. So to answer your question, use it when you need it. I almost always do a pass of loudness normalization at the very end with my entire mix. And in some cases with some clips, I'll do some normalizing early on if it needs it.
This is related, and I think you have some other.
Okay, order. I never know what makes the most sense for EQ, dynamics, and effects. Well, it depends. I think it's okay for EQ. There's actually a technique used by Andrew Sheps, who does a lot of very popular music mixing, renowned mixer. He actually has a technique where he uses EQ to cut or attenuate some of the bass frequencies in vocals. Then he does some dynamics processing, and then he does another passive EQ at the end and boosts them back up. And I'm not going to go into all the reasons for why he does that, but it's a very effective technique. And there's no hard and fast rule. What I can say is that I typically, if I need to clean up a problem, if there's a big problem that EQ can help me with, I'll typically do that before I do my dynamics processing. And then if I want to sweeten things further, I don't hesitate to use another EQ after that. Generally, we did have a live stream some time ago where we talked about order of operations for processing. And I think one thing that's important to think about is if you want to fix the most destructive things first, the things that are ruining your audio clip the worst. So if you have a lot of noise, clipping would be the first thing. If you have any sort of clipping and you need to fix that first, that's the first thing you do. Noise actually can come a little bit later. It's not as for steady state noise, for continuous noise, like a fan. But then I would generally do a passive EQ to clean up any problems with my audio. So if I have a lot of really mid-range energy and it's a little harsh sounding, I might pull some of that down first. Someday I think we should come take a look at that technique that Andrew Sheps uses, where you pull down the bass, compress, and then boost the bass back up, just so you can hear what that does to vocals as well, to dialogue. So anyway, those are some thoughts there. Again, don't get too wrapped up in that. I would do things that are broken with your audio first, fix those first, then make them sound sweeter and louder with dynamics controls, dynamics controls, and then any sort of sweetening on top of that with EQ. And then if you do have some noise, just do a light passive noise reduction after that. By noise, I mean, again, the continuous type of noise. Those are kind of those are some things that's how I generally approach it. Hopefully that's useful. Okay. Specifically the order option in the mixer. Okay, yeah, so if we go and mix and switch over here, you can, I would just leave it at the default unless you have a reason to change it. So here it's doing the effects, then the dynamics, then the EQ. What that refers to, by the way, is that's not referring to anything you put in this effects setup right here. It's actually affecting it, well, so FX refers to anything here in the effects bin. DY, dynamics, refers to this particular instance of dynamics right here. And EQ refers to this EQ down here. So if you put an EQ or a dynamics up in here, that's going to be processed under effects. So however you choose to do that, you can change that order if you need to based on what we just discussed a minute ago. So normally I just leave it here. I generally don't even use these right here. I'll just drop my own in here. This is limited to 6 right here. I know that. I almost never use more than 6 on a single track. If I do, it's because the track is really bad. So I don't even worry about that. But if you want to, you can change that order. So if you wanted to do the effects that you put in the effects bin last, you could do it something like this. Then it will do the dynamics here first, then it will do the EQ here, then it will come back and do the effects here. So you can do that, again, whatever order makes sense for what you're trying to achieve. Okay. Matt, for live work, you go EQ, then DBX in the rack before sending it to the mixing board where you may EQ it back. Makes sense. Yep. EQ to fix any, like usually for, especially like a high pass filter or a low cut, then into the DBX to do the vocal processing, the compression, the de-essing, and then you may have a final EQ. That makes sense. If it's okay for an off-topic question, what does YouTube do to your uploaded videos, and is there a point at which you should upgrade, at which sound upgrades become futile due to YouTube processing? This is Geezer to Tech. Well, I think it depends on your audience and what they're listening on. That's going to have the biggest effect. The AAC encoded video can be quite good. Some people talk about how it compresses the heck out of it. And indeed, if people are listening back on phones, playing at lower resolutions, it actually decreases the audio quality, I believe, when you watch at lower resolutions as well. So if you can, you should always watch it at the highest resolution that's available. That will also increase the audio bit rate. At least traditionally, that's how it's been done on YouTube. I think you need to consider your audience and what they are going to find useful and what they're not. If you're doing vlogs, I'm doubting that Casey Neistat does a whole lot of, he probably normalizes and maybe he has someone who does some audio mixing for him, but he's not eliminating all the noise. When he's riding down the street on his skateboard, you're hearing all the noise. You're hearing the traffic noise. You're hearing everything. Does that take away from it? I don't think so. I think it depends on the format of what you're doing as well as, I guess, what I'm getting at. So I am not as much of a kill all the noise enthusiast as I was when I started. Now for me, if there's a little bit of room tone, that's okay. It's not going to kill anybody. It's real. I try to manage noise in the room, so I'm going to reduce as many fans running in the room as I can, but I'm also not going to take a denoise plugin in post and just crush any room tone so that there's nothing. Generally, even on a podcast, I generally won't do that. So that's my philosophy. Okay. Let's go take a look at some of the fun. There are some fun effects as well, and we should definitely look at those. So get rid of the media pool, turn on the effects, scroll back up. Let's do... There's a pitch. Let's drop the pitch on here. All right, get ready. This is going to be Chipmunk Curtis. And here we go.
All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone
just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in
Isotope RX.
And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone.
Boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth.
All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track
to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone. I'm sorry, that's fun. By the way, you can also do this. Let me just demonstrate the wet-dry mix. All right, we're recording a line here with a
Boom microphone just to get a reference
track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone. Boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away. This is fun. And Matt, you say Darth Vader, Curtis, scary. This is how you do the really fun stuff. Like if you're starting to do sound design, these can be a lot of fun. So that's one. We did have someone mention earlier the reverb. Let's go ahead and drop that in here on this particular one, and let's have a listen through on this. Right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my. Really, really cool what you can do with this to create a sense of space. And you can use that wet-dry mix output setting to really kind of tune in the amount that you want. We didn't even start to play with some of these other things here, but you've got early reflection tones, you've got reverb tones, you can change the distance, brightness, there's some modulation. Speaking of modulation, we have just a couple of minutes. I'm racing against the clock here. We're going to delete that. Let's come back to, I think there's a here's the modulation. We'll drop that on here. Let's play around with this a little bit. Here we go. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth. All right, we're recording a line here with a boom microphone just to get a reference track to show how EQ match works in Isotope RX. And right now we're using the DPA 4017B boom microphone, boomed in the typical position, probably 30 to 40 centimeters away from my mouth. Okay, you get the idea. If you're going to do droids, robots, you've got some tools you can work with here. All right, let's go back out to the main camera. Let's see what last questions we have before we wrap for today. Thank you for doing DaVinci topics like these and for making your recent course. All these tips help new guys like me. Kevin, thank you, Kevin, so much. Grand Studio, would the DPA 4017B polar pattern be good for a two-person interview if the subjects are both standing beside each other? How far would you place the mic in this case? Well, if you have two people, I typically would prefer, unless you're going to be hand booming and cueing back and forth between the people as they talk, I would probably go with a supercardioid or a cardioid if I could. I probably would not use a shotgun microphone if I could avoid it. So that's my kind of general approach. The thing with a shotgun microphone, it's made to have as focused a polar pattern as possible, so it's not great for two-person unless you're cueing. Okay, two more questions. Matt, back when I was a kid, so long time ago, pre-digital, there was a kid who was talented, but I didn't like him, so I would mess with his voice with everything I could. Sorry, it's good you're coming clean now, Matt. But yeah, these tools are a lot of fun to play with. Just be kind about it. Amro says, hello, Curtis, a bit off topic. I'm wondering if you've ever had radio signal music being picked up by a boom mic on set. What could be a solution for this? Thanks. I did have an issue with it on actually not a boom mic. It was on if it's a boom mic, I'm assuming you're using a balanced connection. That's weird. That's odd. I did get on a wireless lavalier once, and it had to do with the transmitter itself. This was like a more consumer-oriented transmitter. This is back in the Road Link days, if you remember those. I don't know if anyone's using those anymore, or probably some people are. It was pretty decent, but it wasn't really well shielded. It had the transmitter had no external antenna, and so I don't think they could shield the body very much because the antennas were inside. And I connected a Sanken COS 11 to it, and it was picking up a radio station. So in that case, I actually had to switch out the microphone and actually go with the original Rode microphone to solve that problem. In their case, I don't know if they were shielding that differently. I don't know I don't know what that was, but sometimes you do have to switch things out. Okay. All right, your mouse is on the screen. Did you know that?
Trying so hard.
We try so hard, but we do make mistakes. Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming to our live stream today for our Sound for Video session. Get out there and make some great sound this week, and we will talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody.